Have you ever watched a video game review where it was mentioned about ray tracing, ambient occlusion or SSR and had no clue what they were talking about? Or maybe you just want to learn more about the ray tracing feature that was advertised to you when you bought your next gen console or PC graphics card? Well, today I'm going to clear up exactly what's going on in the world of ray tracing and break down how it works. Ray tracing came into the mainstream games market in 2018 on PC. It existed before that, but was not being used in gaming due to the power required by the GPU and its negative effect on the game's frames per second performance. It existed only in the form of basic rendering programs for computer design for short animated videos. It later followed onto games consoles as one of the main selling points in 2020 on PS5 and Xbox Series X. Most people seem to think ray tracing in games was available on the last gen consoles and mistook it for the way light rays come down into the game world and produce God rays. This is probably because of the term ray tracing. Well, you'll be surprised to know that this is not actually correct and it's way more complicated, hence why it's only just recently become available now that we have more powerful GPUs. Instead, ray tracing is actually the accurate portrayal of reflections and shadows in order to give the illusion of realistic lighting. What you're seeing here is footage from Assassin's Creed Valhalla, released in November 2020, just shortly after the PS5 and Xbox Series X release dates. Ubisoft never claimed that the game had ray tracing, so what you're seeing here are God rays mixed with screen-spaced ambient occlusion to create realistic shadows. It's not actually ray tracing. To better understand what ray tracing is, you'll need to know what was used before. So until now, the most common way to produce reflections and shadows has been techniques such as rasterization or SSR, which stands for screen-spaced reflections. You've probably seen the term rasterize before if you've ever used Adobe Photoshop. That was the old basic way on PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 era that shadows and lighting used to be rendered and tidied up. It would simply use a character's position as an X position and put a basic shadow or reflection on the floor in the Y position. They would generally be far from perfect, leading to jagged edges when you zoom into the frame. SSR, or screen-spaced reflections, is a more modern technique where developers reuse screen-spaced data in order to calculate the reflection. This was okay for a fair amount of time in gaming, but it wasn't giving perfect results of what would look realistic. The light levels were generally off, and the limited technology of the time meant that a vast amount of reflections had to be blurry. Due to it being based on the current space in the screen, the GPU could only render reflections of things already in your player peripheral vision perspective on screen, and when you move your player, the detail would be lost. Recently, the tech has gotten much better and it's been superseded by ray tracing. So now let's talk about shadows. Well, before ray tracing, we had something called ambient occlusion. It has many forms, including SSAO, which simply means screen-spaced ambient occlusion. Yes, it's all linked together, just like screen-spaced reflections. This is where a player's character shadow would be there and somewhat accurate, but would not have the exact player position. It would be far better than rasterizing the image and was generally pretty good. You would only really notice issues when zoomed in or looking at screenshots. When zoomed in on lower quality games, you could notice maybe an arm would be correct, but then the shadows of a gun possibly in your hand would be off and in a different position than the actual real position. Other issues, well, the shadows could be very blurry, or in some games with sloppy developers, just a black blob on the floor to show a shadow. It all depends on how much work the developer was willing to put into the work. It always felt like such a huge waste seeing developers creating highly detailed character models, but then letting it all go to waste with bad shadows, reflections, and lighting to not show it off. It's also down to the developer to create these highly detailed models. For example, we'll take a look at one of the game industry's worst currently used video game engines, the Creation Engine by Bethesda Game Studios. Whilst it made critically acclaimed games back in 2011, such as The Elder Scrolls Skyrim, it was created using old recycled code from an older engine, meaning that it doesn't really have any place in video games in 2023 due to the vast changes in requirements over the last couple of years. Let's take a look at Fallout 76. This was released in 2018 and developed using the Creation Engine. From a distance, this tree looks perfectly fine, but coming up closer you'll see the leaves and branches are entirely 2D and have not even been well modelled or detailed in any 3D whatsoever, meaning the shadows are going to be completely inaccurate from the get-go. Even the leaves are blurry. Lazy implementation like this is what troubled gaming between 2015 to 2020. Now, with ray trace games, we have a complex algorithm that runs in the background to produce perfect reflections relative to the light being cast. It requires massive CPU and GPU power, So much so that we only got our first stable ray trace games at 60 frames a second on console now in 2023. The best examples to show this here on PC with games such as Cyberpunk 2077. Upon release with the vanilla version of the game, it did not have ray tracing and it used SSR, but after the ray tracing patch, you can see the perfect one-to-one reflections in the puddles. On console, we do have ray tracing features with Cyberpunk, but it only works with shadows and did not actually do anything with the lighting and reflections. It also drops the frames per second down from 60 FPS to 30 FPS because it's so demanding on the GPU, so it's not really worth the trade-off. If we look at a different console ray traced game, let's say the most recent patched version of The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, we can see a vast improvement all around, especially to the lighting of certain scenes. Now, ray trace shadows work alongside ray trace lighting to work out how bright the light should be at different parts of the visible surfaces to give you the realistic shadows and reflections in game. Well, that's it for today, guys. I hope you learned something new. Give me a like and thumbs up. I'll see you in the next one.